Hello, I'm Francesca Penchant. I've been a graphic designer for about 20 years, and I also teach editing at the University of Washington. I've been studying the decadent movement in literature for about 30 years. I studied art and creative writing in college, so I'm interested in decadent writers, and Rachilde in particular as an artist and writer. I research them from an artist's perspective, meaning that I'm interested in their biographies, their styles, their themes, and their artistic processes. But I am a big fan of Rachilde, and I actually started an indie press in 2023 that is named after Rachilde, called Rachilde and Company. As our first title, we are working on publishing The Animal, which is a novel of hers that was published in 1893. Rachilde is the most prominent female writer of the decadent movement, earning her the nickname of Madame Baudelaire. She wrote novels, short stories, plays, articles, and poetry, and she was a literary critic and creative advisor at the Mercure de France, the most influential avant-garde literary journal of her era. She hosted a weekly salon in the Mercure offices for 50 years, attended by such artists as Alfred Jarry, Oscar Wilde, Toulouse-Lautrec, Gauguin, and many others. Rachilde was born in 1860 in Périgueux, a small town with a population of about 20,000 people in southwestern France, a 5-mile drive from Paris. Rachilde was the only child of parents who were very different from each other, a musical mother and a military father. In the book Why I Am Not a Feminist, 1928, Rachilde writes that her father was a Don Juan of the worst kind, the military kind, who changed mistresses as often as he changed garrisons. Rachilde describes her mother as cold and terrifyingly beautiful. Her father said of her mother, "No matter how beautiful a statue may be, it's still no match for a woman." A formative experience of Rachilde's life was when, in preparation for her arranged marriage, her mother had a servant drown her large menagerie of pets. This was one of her mother's misdeeds that created Rachilde's deep antipathy for women and empathy for animals. After this experience, Rachilde threw herself into a pond in a possible suicide attempt, and later fell into a depression and temporarily lost the use of her legs, which changed the trajectory of her life. Her parents no longer insisted that she get married, and they began to support her writing. Her father sold his hunting hounds to raise money for her to go to Paris and pursue her literary career.
Alors, donc Rachilde naît dans le Périgord en 1860, dans une maison qui s'appelle le Croc, qui veut dire le trou. À ce moment-là, elle s'appelle encore Marguerite Emery. Elle est la fille d'un militaire, Joseph, et d'une demi-mondaine, enfin d'une ancienne coquette, non pas demi-mondaine, mondaine tout court, Gabrielle, qui était artiste en proie à une semi-folie. Après la guerre de 70, Joseph vient s'installer au Croc. Il est atteint de surdité, il est défiguré par la petite vérole et les relations dans le couple sont absolument abominables. Elle est très jalouse, en proie à des crises de nerfs régulières. Bref, tous les deux délaissent un peu Rachilde, enfin Marguerite plutôt, qui passe son temps dans la bibliothèque familiale à lire le Marquis de Sade et Voltaire sans vraiment comprendre. Joseph apprend à Marguerite à monter à cheval et à manier l'épée. Donc c'est ainsi qu'elle se construit, de lectures personnelles et des leçons de chasse et de cheval de son père. À 15 ans, son père décide de la marier. Elle a son premier acte de révolte, elle refuse et elle tente de se suicider dans la mare de la maison, dans la mare du Croc. Son père renonce au mariage et c'est à ce moment, à cette période de son existence, qu'elle va raconter un curieux cauchemar qui va revenir régulièrement la hanter et qui laisse à penser que peut-être elle a été agressée sexuellement près de cette mare. Les années 70, c'est l'époque du spiritisme. On fait tourner les tables et régulièrement, les grands-parents de Rachilde viennent au Croc pour faire tourner les tables. Et Marguerite prétend se faire posséder par l'esprit d'un gentilhomme suédois de la Renaissance qui s'appelle Rachilde. Et donc à partir de ce moment-là, elle voudra que tout le monde l'appelle Rachilde.
One of Rachilde's most famous novels is the Succès de Scandale that was published when she was 24, Monsieur, Vénus, 1884. It caused a Belgian court to try her in absentia and sentence her to 2 years in prison for pornography. Because of its erotic content and upending of traditional 19th century mores of class, gender, and sexuality, it brought Rachilde into the public eye. The novel tells the story of French noblewoman Raoul de Venerand and her pursuit of a gentle male florist named Jacques Silver. Through a process of escalating dehumanization, she transforms her lover from an androgynous young man into a veritable doll. Scholars consider Monsieur, Vénus Rachilde's breakthrough work. It has a number of her characteristic themes, including a sadistic female protagonist who upends traditional gender roles. The darkly erotic The Marquise de Sade is a semi-autobiographical Bildungsroman about Mary Barbe, whose mother is sickly and whose father is a colonel. Mary's family moves constantly for the colonel's military career. Throughout the novel, the colonel expresses the wish that Mary had been a boy. Finally, Mary's mother gives birth to her father's long-wished-for son. Jealous of her baby brother, Mary does not save him when a drunken servant accidentally smothers him to death. When Mary grows up, she lives with her uncle, a scientist. Mary enters into a loveless arranged marriage to a baron, whose son she has an affair with. She murders a countess, prowls at night, sleeps during the day, and is unrepentantly bad till the very end of the book. Rachilde's book, with the provocative title of Why I Am Not a Feminist, 1928, may alienate feminist scholars. But it is important to note that Rachilde writes on the first page that she did not choose its inflammatory title. Her publisher chose it. At the back of Why I Am Not a Feminist, there is an advertisement promoting the other books in the series, written by prominent writers of the day. For example, Why I Am a Socialist by Léon Blum, Why I Am Jewish by Edmund Flegg, Why I Am Catholic by Jean Guiraud, and Why I Am a Rationalist by Paul Soudet. She goes on to write, I do not think that anyone in the literary world or among the general public really cares to know why I do not agree with my modern neighbors. Rachilde wrote the book at age 67, so it is not surprising that she may have been out of step with the new 1920s generation. However, in Why I Am Not a Feminist, Rachilde explains that she considers herself different from other women. She writes, I have never trusted women, the eternal feminine having first deceived me under the maternal mask, and I do not trust myself either. I have always regretted not being a man, not because I think more of the other half of humanity, but because obliged, by duty or by taste, to live like a man, to carry the heaviest burden of life alone during my youth, it would have been preferable to have at least the privileges, if not the appearances. It's also notable that Rachilde views gender as binary in this passage. Rachilde's works have some common themes. In her work and life, Rachilde explored sexuality, identity, and gender. Before her marriage, she wore pants and short hair. She enjoyed dressing in traditional men's clothing when attending costume balls with the writer Jean Lorrain, and also attended the Sapphic cabarets of Paris. In 2020, Stanford University Press published Rachel Mesch's book, Before Trans, 3 Gender Stories from 19th Century France. In it, Mesch explores the lives of 3 19th century writers assigned female at birth, who pushed the boundaries of traditional gender identities in different ways. They used literature to explore, understand, and grapple with their gender identities when they may not have had terms to define themselves in that era, especially in French, an inherently binary gendered language. With their writing, these individuals were saying, I am me, do not categorize me. Mesch investigates some of the ways in which Rachilde defied gender norms. For example, she had a calling card that read, Homme de Lettres. Mesch also discusses Rachilde's application for what was known as a pants permit, a paper from the government allowing women to wear pants if they had medical reasons to do so. Animals are another constant in Rachilde's work. Again and again in Rachilde's novels, characters mistreat animals. The very first scene of the Marquise de Sade takes place in a slaughterhouse full of distressed oxen, sheep, and calves, where Mary sees a butcher killing an animal and faints from shock. There is also a scene at a children's party where the girls receive little lambs as gifts. One of the little boys breaks the leg of Mary's lamb and drags it away in triumph. Rachilde even identified with animals. Melanie C. Hawthorne and Diana Holmes, in their biographies of Rachilde, write that Rachilde claimed that her family tree included a werewolf. In her novel, The Animal, 1893, there is a female protagonist who feels deep sympathy for a kitten that she takes in and treats it like her own child. She writes, "In the month that she had owned this cat, she had experienced all of the joys and pangs of primipara. She had found him in the street near a manhole, clinging to the sidewalk. And as she caught sight of him, her heart had suddenly opened up to an immense tenderness for a tiny infant." Rachilde incorporates the latest theories of 19th century social scientists in the Marquise de Sade and other works. Scientists such as Franz Joseph Gall, Cesare Lombroso, Max Nordau, Richard von Krafft-Ebing, and William Acton believed in social theories, particularly those about women, that has since been disproved. In the book Decadence in Literature, Jordan Kistler writes in the chapter entitled The Science of Decadence about some of the scientific themes that Rachilde and other decadents wove throughout their work. One influential theory was that physical traits were a clue to character. Phrenology, Franz Joseph Gall's detailed study of the cranium as a supposed indication of character and mental abilities, was popular in the early 1800s. In the 19th century, scientists such as Cesare Lombroso believed that physical traits could carry the mark of evil. Kistler writes that Lombroso's theories, particularly the physical characteristics of the born criminal, permeated popular culture throughout Europe. This theory is clear in the Marquise de Sade, when Mary's scientist uncle notices that her thumb is almost as long as the thumb of a criminal whose severed arm is in his lab. According to her uncle and the prevailing scientific theories of the time, this and other physical traits are signs of her inborn immoral nature. Mary's uncle confirms this by saying to her later, "You have a monomania for cruelty." Another popular theory during the late 1800s was that normal, healthy women were submissive, asexual, and maternal. Dr. William Acton claimed that the majority of women, happily for them, are not very much troubled with sexual feeling of any kind. Rachilde's Mary in the Marquise de Sade, on the other hand, is a femme fatale, assertive, sexual, and unmaternal. Kistler writes that the femme fatale is an archetype constructed from the scientific belief that the modern age was blurring the lines between the sexes, masculinizing women and emasculating men. The femme fatale is beautiful, exotic, sexually aggressive, violent, and unmaternal. She is, in essence, the opposite of the ideal European woman of the 19th century. The perverse nature of a woman seeking sexual or economic independence was reified by science during this period. She continues, Krafft-Ebing and other medical professionals insisted that voluntary subjection to the opposite sex came naturally to women. A desire for equality, then, was a sign of an unnatural nature. Sexual desire, too, was pathologized. Doctors like William Acton insisted that women did not naturally experience sexual desire, a position later confirmed by Krafft-Ebing. Since woman has less sexual need than man, a predominating sexual desire in her arouses a suspicion of its pathological significance. As a discipline, then, sexology considered female desire a symptom of disease. Rachilde wrote Mary's personality to go against the scientific grain of the day and is clearly a bad seed. She lets her baby brother be suffocated by a drunk servant. She murders a countess. she expresses an unfeminine interest in science and a desire for her young lover. And she has a clear sadistic streak, as when she tattoos her lover with her own initials. With Mary's disinterest in having children, she represents the new woman. Kistler writes, in the Darwinian understanding of progress, which is always linked to propagation, the failure to reproduce suggests that the new breed of woman will die out before she has a chance to impact the species. Rachilde died in 1953 at the age of 93. She wrote up until the very end of her life. French literature scholar Melanie C. Hawthorne traveled to Périgueux about 20 years ago, and there were no monuments to Rachilde. The people whom she spoke to in the town had not even heard of her. So she is a relatively little-known figure in French literature, considering how prolific she was and what an influence she had during her lifetime, although interest in her is increasing, especially among feminist scholars.
Les débats contemporains autour des identités de genre pourraient susciter un regain d'intérêt pour l'univers de Rachilde. Mais il est difficile aujourd'hui d'accéder à tous ces textes.
Rachilde a écrit une soixantaine de romans et recueils de poésie. Et aujourd'hui, il ne reste que 5 titres disponibles chez les libraires, ce qui est extrêmement triste et assez désolant.
Rachilde wrote of herself, "I always acted as an individual."